Political parties are machines, and it's less about the people.
Is he even fit to serve and run our country for the next 4 months?
The future of the military-industrial complex is not just overseas. It's right here in America.
Like, you become unstoppable when you work on the things that people can't take away from you.
Welcome back to the King's Table. Man, do we have a special episode for you. This was a really fun episode to record. I think we had a really great docket of topics. We firstly get into President Biden steps down last week and, of course, endorses Kamala Harris. She secures all the delegates, and we process that. We talk a little bit about the Trump assassination attempt and how the Secret Service Cheatle hearing went down and how she's resigned. Talk about some predictions about Trump and how that could be affected with tariffs and supply and demand, which was a really fun global economics conversation. We just had the world's largest IT outage with Crowdstrike and Microsoft last week. So we talk about that, what's really going on. And man, are we kind of crossing and touching some conspiracy theories, or is it just common sense logic of what's going on in the world? But really a fun conversation. We're excited for you guys to listen. Make sure you guys comment and follow us on YouTube and social media and everything. And make sure you leave comments and questions. Love you guys so much for listening. Thanks so much for listening to the King's Table podcast. Here we go. All right, guys, here we go. We got a full docket today. Let's just get into the topics. Biden steps down, officially resigns from running again in 2024. I can't say we were completely surprised by this, but definitely it's news. In the last couple of days, he then endorses Kamala to run. Who knows if she's going to stay? Let's talk about that. But I will say that she set a record of the biggest fundraising day in political history. I think they raised over $100 million in the last 3 to 4 days. Everybody stacked up right behind her. She very quickly got all of the delegate votes. I want to talk about that. So let's just look at this from all different angles. One of the things that I'm really interested in talking about is, if you look at the facts here, normally, from my understanding, you have to have an open convention in order to have enough delegates to be able to vote. So the people get to actually vote for this. But this swap happened so quickly and there was really nobody voting. And the delegates, maybe I was surprised. I don't know if you guys were surprised about how quickly the delegates just lined up right behind her. And so what does this mean? And I guess the second question to that is, do people really care about this? The fact that this is happening and people are just, it's just you're really not electing who's running for the Democratic Party. Do people really care? And if they care, how are they going to show that they care? Mikey, I can already see you thinking. Let's start with you, brother. How you doing? Let's get into it.
Doing good. And I think if you shifted the word to do people understand, it would be a completely different conversation. Because do people care? I think they care. But I don't think they understand how big of a deal the leadership of the United States of America is. So do they care about it? Yeah, they care. They care about the politics and the brainwashing and, their stance and everything else. But do we really understand how important and powerful, the leader of the United States of America is? And I would say people don't understand.
That's a really interesting kind of angle to think about it, right? Because I think if people really understood the fact that their democratic process is somewhat being hijacked by the Democratic delegates and saying, we don't care about your 14 million votes and the fact that you think Joe Biden is our primary candidate on the ticket, and we don't think he has a chance anymore. So sorry, let's move your votes out of the way. Let's push him out of the way. And we're going to decide who we think is the best person to win on your behalf. Doesn't that essentially take away from the entire democratic process that they so aggressively say they're fighting against?
Yeah, I mean, what should happen? Let's talk about that.
I also just want to mention, I'm at a hotel, Mike's in an airport. I love that we're all still here today, pushing this out today. I think, the All In guys did a great analysis of this a couple weeks ago. When those delegates voted for Biden, they also voted for Kamala if Biden isn't fit to serve, right? I kind of think they had to. I think their only option was to say hey, we all voted for Biden. Biden picked her. She's it. Because if he got elected and died, God forbid, on the first day of office, like she was next in line, and him stepping down, whether it's being unfit to run, whatever. So, I mean, I think kind of it's all like theory because it hasn't been done before. From a legal standpoint, she was the only one that they could use the money raised for Biden for her campaign. Any other candidate they switched to, they'd have had to figure out what to do with the money, give the money back, or give it to like senators and governors. I am actually proud of they said, let's try to shake this up a little bit instead of just going down for it. I think I had mentioned before, like nobody really wanted to be the substitute candidate and come in and not have a chance. Like all the other people we had talked about, the Gavin Newsoms and those guys want to win someday. They don't want to be Mitt Romney. They don't want to be John McCain. They don't want to be the ones that like nobody remembered. John Kerry, right? The guys that came in, took a shot at an unwinnable election and never got to do it again. So nobody really wanted to get substituted in this late in the game. And the fact that the Democrats said, like, you know what, he's going to lose for sure. Let's try to shake it up a little bit. Had they not do any changes, I wholeheartedly believe Trump's going to win no matter what. I think seeing Kamala come in and having a shake up, they're going to shake it up a bit. My quick feeling was, I think it was kind of predictable because of what we learned from some of the other experts that taught us about the way that the money flows, and his personal view that nobody else wanted to get substituted in anyway. But it's kind of like, yeah, the weird part is like technically they should have gone back and had a new Democratic convention, do a new voting and new whatever. So I think this was the only way they could do something quickly and say they're kind of honoring their voters. They're kind of honoring their primary voters that said we want it to be Biden, and if Biden dies, that means it's going to be Kamala. He's stepping down. I don't know if I say her name right, so somebody's going to correct a bunch. But anyway, that's my quick take. I think that was their only option. I think they had to do that. Otherwise, they were going to have to do a re-voting.
And that's an interesting take, right? I actually didn't think about it that way, in the sense that by voting for Biden, they were also voting for Kamala. I'm not sure if everybody feels that way, but that is a pretty spot on argument I could get behind for individuals. I even saw BLM came out and said that, the Democrats are the party of hypocrites, and that they don't feel like, putting Kamala in there was in the best interest of everybody, and that it should go back to an open primary and give the American people the right to choose who they want. But just the way, I don't know about you guys, but did any of this just feel weird about how they did it?
I love this part of the story. I think there's a whole nother conversation in like that week.
I mean, all this happened in some like back room with like 4 people.
Yeah, I mean, to me, it seems very interesting that, just the sequencing of all of this, it's so coincidental that all of these things sequentially play out the way that they did. And I think a lot of people could have said, oh, well, that doesn't surprise me, because ultimately it didn't surprise me. But the way they went about doing it just felt very weird. And I think it kind of exposed that we're not, and Vivek made a post about this. He said, we're not running against a candidate. We're running against a machine and a much larger system here. And they displayed that with ultimately how they went about this, because everybody from Joe Biden's camp said, dude ain't dropping out. Like, he's in it. He wants to stay in this thing. And then all of a sudden you started hearing, hey, if he gets some kind of illness within 24 hours, he gets COVID, then he goes into hiding. Nobody had seen him. I mean, it was trending on Twitter, hashtag where's Joe,
was he dead?
Yeah, I mean, you heard stuff like that.
Dude, I was wondering that. Yeah.
And then you hear, him basically step out of the presidential race, which is hard to believe that, the most popular president and ticket in history goes from that to the least popular president and ticket in history, to where they have to essentially force him out. My theory is he wanted to stay in. His party knew that he wasn't going to beat Trump, and the polling showed that behind the scenes they knew it. And while he was being stubborn and wanted to stay in, they essentially pulled a coup on him and said, we don't care if you want to stay in. you're sick. He goes into hiding. All of a sudden, no address to the nation, no press release, no pre-recorded message. The signature on the letter that he sent out was like a digital grainy stamped one, and it wasn't his actual signature. I mean, just nothing, silence. I mean, and you would think for something as historic as this, and for somebody that probably cares about his legacy, I would imagine that he would want to come on and address this in a way that gives his party and just the American people in general. He's still the sitting commander in chief right now. So if he's unable to do this, is he even fit to serve and run our country for the next 4 months?
Did you guys think it was interesting?
I think what you just said there at the end, Maddie, is probably what they're grappling with. Because if Joe Biden is not fit to finish out his term and we let Kamala Harris in too soon and we see how incompetent she is, there's no way she's getting elected. That's what I would be thinking if I was a Democrat.
100%.
Dude, the whole other side of that. I mean, dude, one of the all-in guys totally predicted this whole thing a few weeks ago and just said Biden's going to keep saying he's in no matter what while they figure out who the substitute is. Then they're going to realize that Kamala is the only substitute. But then if he isn't fit to rerun, then he isn't fit to serve. So their pitch was before the November elections, they're going to actually force him to step out so she can already become the first female president. Make a big deal of it, like big celebration of that she's the first president already before they go to the election, because then it's maybe a little bit easier to elect somebody that's already a president. Right. And so both sides. So one, if they bring her in and we see she's bad, then people are like, oh my God, we hate her. But if they bring her in, like there's going to be women that are getting emotional over it. And it's like, everyone, I don't know why I said that, just like as the first woman president, right? So there's both sides. So they might not do it. I could see them doing that. I could see it happening.
They may have convinced him not to run, but I don't think they can convince him not to be president unless he's dead. I think he's going to, as long as he's alive, he'll run his term out. That's my projection.
I don't think he's going to make it.
I don't think it was his choice. I mean, I think Maddie's coup idea.
No, I just think in general, medical wise or not, I don't think he's going to make it until November. He's not going to do the transition of power.
Just however they got to do it. You're like, however they got to do it, it's going to be.
Doesn't matter. Take him out.
What's crazy to me is the least popular VP of all time historically. The fact that she was in 2020 so poorly received that she dropped out immediately. To me, it just reminds me of how easily manipulated the average mind is by the media, because they did not have her back. And then all of a sudden, even when they did have her back, she was still in every poll so low over the last 4 years. And now all of a sudden they're polishing up her in a way that makes her seem like she's going to be the savior to the American people in the Democratic Party.
She's like a new person.
It's just so mind-blowing to me.
It's the machine versus person, Vivek idea. It really is that idea of realizing it's whoever and the Republicans are, other than Trump, I think the Republicans are the same, right? That we're a machine. The political parties are machines, and it's less about the people. And that's probably like the biggest, and they can make anybody look good on a stage.
Do you think people will, because I think a few weeks ago we talked about how there may be never Trumpers who are not necessarily even confident that they want to vote for Biden because of his cognitive state. But now that you have Kamala, you may kind of get that wave come in. Do you think people will forgive her for sort of lying about his actual state and hiding things? And it's almost like they're just forgetting that even happened. All those shadow games. And then second question is the dynamic for Trump any different today than it was 1 week ago? Do you think his strategy, his camp, his odds have changed?
Well, two things on that real quick. MSNBC just did a panel of a bunch of Democratic voters, and it was actually interesting because I was thinking that same thing to your first question. And they said, we actually don't have a lot of trust in her because if she hid this and was lying about this the entire time, going forward in the future, what else is she going to hide and or lie about the American people? So I really think that, and again, depends on the person and what they actually understand. But I do think that that is something that people are, questioning and battling. The other side of it was that Trump's campaign came out, I think, a little bit earlier this week and said that they had been planning since May for the idea that they assumed Biden was going to drop out and that they would be campaigning against a different candidate. So I think they've already kind of had some strategy. Who was going to be the head that, stepped into that role, I think was obviously TBD. But Trump is, trying to do what he can right now to stop, I think it was the Federal Election Commission from allowing them to transfer all of that money over to Kamala Harris. He also said, hey, we've been following the rules and we've been campaigning against somebody based on the way the rules are written. And all of a sudden those rules are undone. If you're going to allow her to receive this money, then we should be reimbursed all the money that we spent campaigning against a candidate that legally we had to campaign against based on the way the rules are written. So what do you guys want to do here? Whether or not they're going to do something about it, I don't think so. But I think it's a fair point. And, the way that they're playing this game of chess at a really high level right now. And I think we're all witnessing it firsthand because this is never before. They're rewriting the story for the Democratic Party right now in front of us as we speak. And it's stuff that I know they probably had some strategies for and felt like they could, push through and get away with. But I also think when you're forced to pivot and adapt on a dime, there's stuff that you just can't cover up along the way. And I think that is ultimately going to come back to bite them in the butt.
Let's if you guys have any final comments, but I want to talk about something else. Go ahead, Mooch.
I have a couple of thoughts on it, but I guess I'll just jump in. And then, so one was there's this video clip, maybe we can find it later or put it in the notes of the YouTube, where the day after the debates, they're asking Trump about the debates while he's out on the golf course. And he says, I'm not going to be running against Biden anymore. I'm going to be running against Kamala. So for them to be like saying that they were prepared for this is legitimate. Like, I think they were, at least he was, or thinking it. I've seen a lot of things that said like, hey, the timing of this by the Democrats was sneaky because we just spent the whole Republican convention talking about Biden, right? And why he's better than Biden. And we didn't get the chance to talk about why he's better than Kamala. But I think most of the convention was actually about Trump and the assassination thing. I think most of the Republican convention was actually about Trump. So, and like it would be really great if they got to focus the rest, except for like the anti on somebody else, just like the pro on who we have. I think that is something unique that's been happening with his campaign since the assassination attempt. Like, it's more about, he seems like a changed man. He gets on stage and he says, I'm not supposed to be here today except for the grace of God. And you feel it, and grown men are crying in there. And I think that, so there could have been maybe some missed opportunities to go against that. There is more hype behind Kamala than I was expecting. So I guess that was my bigger surprise, was there was actually, like, I was like, oh, it's over. And I saw more responses that were like, oh no, we're just starting again. I'm like, huh, that took me by surprise.
I think probably like you, I was surprised too, but I think a lot of people are surprised that in 3 days you see this much activity.
What's interesting about seeing this much activity too, we have to remember that the media went kind of silent and like threw Joe Biden under the bus, and then all of a sudden got really loud. So,
yeah,
we got to take that. Yeah, we got to take that with a grain of salt. Like, of course there's a bunch of, flash and flare, and we're seeing it everywhere because, it's the media's darling. And the last thing that I want to say on all of this, I've cited this a couple times, but that old CIA manual from 1948, like, the number one way to destroy your enemy is like to create confusion. And when you look at the last few weeks, utter chaos and confusion. And so, by hiding Joe Biden, I listened to the entire congressional hearing with
Cheatle.
With Cheatle, and stonewalling and no answers and confusion. And the thing that they kept saying in that, and I'll tie this back to the confusion piece, the thing that they kept saying through that whole thing is like, there are rumors flying everywhere, conspiracy theories. And you would think, as a representative of the number one most important agency tasked with protecting the president, you would want to get some truth out and hold press conferences and get ahead of some of this stuff. Like, why wouldn't you want to do that? It's a valid question. And the only reason you wouldn't want to do that is to create chaos and confusion so that all of us are out here going, spending all of our time thinking about, the conspiracy theories and making up our own stuff while they're back there puppeteering and doing what they want. So it kind of makes sense. It's distraction.
Terrible hearing. So just it's almost embarrassing.
I mean, to me, it's treasonous.
Yeah.
It's funny. It feels like we have a right to know stuff, but I think there's also this argument that does it actually give would-be assassins like how, like, is there some info that actually should be protected? When like, how could this happen? And like, is there like an argument of why you shouldn't actually give the playbook of how it happened, so people don't find the loopholes in the system? Like, I think there is a fair reason why maybe we don't have a right to know as much as we want to, just to like, steel man it for a minute.
I agree with that, but to the contrary of that, right? I understand not wanting to give some of the intelligence playbook and details out. Totally understand that side of it. But when you've got an average American or citizen asking basic questions around how these things happened that are public knowledge and are just warranting a pretty logical explanation or response, and you're getting the I don't know answer to every question, to me, right? That stonewalling is not a, hey, we're doing this to protect, our internal playbook for the safety of all of the potential candidates and or individuals that we're protecting going forward. This is we're not sharing because we need to cover something up. We're not sharing because there's total gross negligence here. We're not sharing because that lack of transparency in a congressional hearing, which is the highest court of transparency, is unacceptable.
I mean, 9 days
even
later,
just using the word
she should have had a lot of
intelligence,
those answers.
There was none of that in this whole situation. And if I was actually concerned about that, I would, even with enemy states, I would want to get out ahead of this immediately and say, you know what? Now, thinking through the lens of we're not trying to cover something up internally, I would want to get ahead of this thinking about, foreign enemies and say, look, we made a major mistake. This will not happen going forward. You're not going to have a chance at our president. If you actually cared about protecting the president and there was any intelligence involved in this, like, you would want to get out in front of this, I would think. But I think the bottom line is, like, we're so close to the election. There's no accountability. By the way to, eliminate accountability is to create confusion. And like, we're all out here going like, there's like, what do we even hold accountable to? Because we don't know if it was Iran or just sheer stupidity, or if it was the Secret Service,
man.
or
absolutely crazy.
It's nuts.
I guess it would be nice in the sense, like, some of the stuff we recorded last week was like, maybe the whole reason it happened was because they thought there was a friendly over there. So like, it would be nice if there was some sort of like the 2 or 3 big questions of like, we knew about it 40 minutes before. There's some big questions.
I think they've gone through the timeline and they have a big pile of crap.
Mm-hmm.
And they don't know how to explain it. And I think our guest last week, who was amazing, by the way, said it really nicely. He's like, I don't want to assume wrongdoing or like somebody did this nefariously. I want to assume that this was complete negligence. And all she had to do was saying, we totally screwed up. Here's the specific chain of events. This is what we're going to do about that chain of events. We're going to retrain everybody.
Mm-hmm.
You're right. We absolutely failed. And everything that is confidential that we can't share publicly, we've sent in a private confidential memorandum to your office 3 days ago. That's not safe security information to be shared with everybody. But here's the facts. Here's the information. And we're sorry we let you down. Instead, 9 days later, she literally, it's not even about hiding. She didn't know the answers to so many simple, basic 101 questions.
No, she's hiding it. She knows. She knows.
Sure.
She knows.
She's complicit.
Terrible, man.
I think it's funny too, right? Now that she's resigned, it's like, oh, okay, we trust the Secret Service again. We're good. She's out of the way. No, we want answers. Yeah. Like I had to hear about freaking January 6th, insurrection of people sitting in Nancy Pelosi's chair for 4 years straight. Now we're going to move on after 10 days of, talking about Trump's assassination, and the left doesn't even want to, acknowledge it.
Well, look, if they can squeeze out the president of the United States, they can squeeze her out, right? She's irrelevant. So that's what's scary. And the chain of events about how RFK now has a Secret Service and like all these things, it's just scary. The cover-ups and the information flow, like, man.
Do you remember when they were trying to take away Trump's Secret Service? They were trying to actually say why he shouldn't have it, and it's limited. But they were trying to eliminate it.
No, they still are. The guy that had that request put in, it's still there. And they're going to continue to try and remove it, which is wild. I don't think that will work in their favor. Another thing that I thought was very interesting during Kimberly Cheatle's congressional hearing, because I followed a lot of it pretty closely. She said that a popular Democratic representative, Sheila Jackson, was heavily involved in the oversight of the Secret Service, and she went on to kind of talk about a lot of the stuff that she was involved in. And then all of a sudden, 6 days after the attempted assassination of Trump, that woman was dead.
I heard.
What
happened to her?
No previous health issues. I don't know.
My God.
I don't know. So there's one thing there, right? And then if you
I'm actually retiring from this podcast. This is my last time being on the podcast. I have this
I
newfound.
got one more for you.
Man, buckle up.
Do you know, you remember what was it? That thing is not real. That chick that got on the plane and like became a meme. And then all of a sudden she disappeared for like 6 months. And then, so there's this group that I forget what they call themselves, but they essentially are like hackers and data guys. And so they can hack into people's cell phone records and do all these things. And they track these individuals and their movements. And so they went on to like track that woman, and she was tied to a military base that was tied to the FBI. And there was weird things that happened with her. And again, conspiracy theory, right? All these weird things. Well, they did it again with this Thomas Crook's cell phone. And they just released their report that was pretty wild. And again, take it for what it is, but these guys are like, hey, this is what we found. If anybody else knows anything and wants to work with us and is a really valid resource, like, we're happy to talk with you. But otherwise, like, we're not interested in going down conspiracy theory. So they're kind of like, we're trying to be, as unbiased as possible and just share what technology allows us to have access to. So someone who regularly visited Crook's home and work also visited a building in Washington, D.C. located in Gallery Place. Gallery Place is the same vicinity of a large FBI office, and that was on 1 or 2 weeks before the assassination attempt. Another device linked to Crooks visited a specific office in Plymouth, Massachusetts, which was also tied to another FBI office. They found a device linked to Crook's work that traveled to Butler, PA on July 4th and July 8th. And then this device stopped all activity on July 12th. On August 30th, one device linked to Crooks visited Allegheny Arms. I don't know if that has anything to do with it. It sounds like that was somewhere close to the site. All of the relevant locations within Bethel Park, Pennsylvania, that are linked to both Crook's home and place of work have all of these different ties to different kind of cell phones that were tied to his location. So basically what they were just saying was like, we identified multiple devices that were located at Crook's home and his work within the past year, which essentially just kind of shows like this kid didn't just pop up on that roof and was doing something by himself. Like, there was a lot more going on here that we, probably can assume had to do with multiple parties involved in this, and that some, dweeb that's in his 20s, with glasses is all of a sudden a sharpshooter and has 15 minutes of free reign to line up, headshots on the president. A lot of that stuff just doesn't add up. So I just thought that was interesting.
We may never know.
I doubt.
So on that point, the first thing that I would do when I got sworn into office, if I was Trump, is I would release the Kennedy assassination files.
He already said
hell yeah.
I would be so like, you know what? I'm done with this. Like, here, everybody see it.
Well, he said he was going to do that on his Secret Service, the committee review as well.
He said he released some before. He didn't release all of them.
But how real are the files? Right? Like, so meaning if the CIA,
right?
If the CIA friggin' shoots the president, they're not gonna leave those files in.
Guys. Okay, we're gonna change topics. We're gonna get canceled for sure. We're becoming a conspiracy theory.
We're either gonna have zero views because we're suppressed, or we're gonna have 10 million.
Yeah, I quit. Just so you guys know, I quit.
Is it conspiracy theory if there's real logical discussions to be had?
I knew you were going to say that, but I think you're spot on by asking relatively good questions, rational questions. But yeah, it's we because of Twitter. I mean, I said this in the group chat, right? It's like now because of Twitter and real-time communication, the amount of theories that fly out, it's like we almost assume that somebody is playing or there's manipulation. Like somebody can't just get sick anymore. Somebody can't just fail anymore. Somebody can't just screw up their job anymore. Well, now it's like, oh no, this is all an act. Like everything can't be wrongdoing. Come on.
This goes back to what I was saying about creating confusion. If you want to have zero accountability, just create mass confusion.
All right, let's go into some more confusion stuff. I want to get into, because we talked and we gave some predictions last week, and just a little bit of business stuff here, because for
boring
for a Trump
we
election,
talk conspiracy theories.
Yeah, no, we're gonna get into real stuff. No more conspiracy theory stuff. Listen to another podcast.
Crowdstrike.
Well, I want to talk about tariff really quick.
Dude, we have so much to hit.
There's no shortage of content right now.
Yeah, so we're preparing for a Trump presidency in my business, and I thought this would be interesting to you guys and maybe to the audience also, about how Trump tariffs, or I shouldn't just say Trump tariffs, but tariffs in general, are really going to cause inflation, and what they have already done. Trump has alluded to that he's going to increase tariffs further, not only to China, but he's talked about electric vehicle tariffs out of Mexico, all the other Southeast Asian countries, not just China. So this is a chart showing, I just kind of ran a sample for an argument, right? So we can all understand. So if something is sold for $100, cost is $70, and the gross margin is $30, that was all pre-tariff, okay? When tariff went to 25%, this is what happened, is prices went up. So we saw 10% price inflation. Our costs went up because tariffs were paid on the cost of goods sold, okay? But overall, manufacturers, distributors are pretty much going to try to maintain gross margin. So this is a simulation trying to show you sort of the effect of that. And so you're seeing gross margin percentage erosion, but ultimately the gross dollars are going to stay fixed and remain, right? So at 25%, all we saw was generally a 10% increase in price. Now he's proposing a 60% tariff, okay? So I want you guys to look at what would happen. I kind of ran a simulation of if tariff increased by 10%, what would happen, right?
Is the tariff for every country going to be the same? Is it going to be different for different countries?
No, I think it'll be different. For China, it's on a certain amount of category of product. It's about 70% of the imports. Yeah. About 20 or 30% are much lower rate, but generally speaking, 60 to 70% is at 25%. But he will then take, let's say, China's tariffs. I think there's a 50-50 chance he does this, but let's say he does it. He'll take the China tariffs up, and then he'll look at Mexico and Vietnam and all the other countries and maybe start at 10, depending on what that does. And ultimately, his mission with Section 301 tariff is to bring jobs back to America, right? But I think that his advisors will simply create a mathematical structure for him that says, hey, listen, if we do this, there's a certain threshold where prices will go up until we meet that precipice where it costs to make product in the United States. So for us right now, made in China versus made in the US is about 25 to 30% variance. Well, you can see 45% tariff will take care of that. So you increase tariff to 45%, our prices go up by 38%, and now you maybe make price parity to make product in the United States. Unfortunately, the manufacturing capability doesn't exist, but all you did was increase price. And even if you have to go back to China to get the goods because of the tariff, now you're at price parity in the United States.
Wait,
so essentially you just had significant price inflation.
why does your cost go up too? So it's either the price gets increased or your cost gets increased, or it gets increased at the same amount.
No,
right?
the cost increases because of the tariff. And so the price
it's the same
increases.
So it's a straight line. So if the tariff's $20,
it's a straight line.
That means it costs you $20 more in their prices. Got it.
Yeah, and the cost of goods doesn't change. It's just the tariff on that cost of goods.
So you just single-handedly got Kamala Harris elected. I just want to put that on the record.
I believe. Oh, let Mike. I want to hear Mike's take because I got a big take on it.
Yeah, I think I can make this quick. Anytime we need to make drastic change, it's going to be painful. And, that's the bottom line with this. Like, we've gotten ourselves over the last 30, 40 years in this position, through the globalist agenda. And COVID was a great example. COVID wrecked a lot of stuff because of major supply chain issues. And when you look at, I know you're not advocating, against this. It's just the reality. You're just showing the reality of what's going to happen. I completely understand that.
Yeah.
But the other side, just to kind of throw this out there, of it, making change is painful, and I don't know that long term it's going to happen because of the swings. And I'm kind of becoming more and more in the middle than I've ever been. Yes, I would love to have Donald Trump elected, but I'm coming back to a thought process that I had more than 5 years ago of, like this whole uniparty concept. And really, with the cycles of change, Trump's going to come in, make major changes. Somebody else is going to come in, change it back. Even not to go off on this, but like with JD Vance and the technology industry in their pocket, we have major macro problems. And, even the Crowdstrike thing, I personally think that like all of that, just like when the Patriot Act happened, the Patriot Act happened because of 9/11. And I think situations like Crowdstrike are just another way for us to say, hey, look, and there's a rhetoric that's been happening for a while, and Trump is the leader of this. And I think there's a lot of truth to this. Terrorists are penetrating our borders, and there's a day coming where the wars are not all over the world. They're within our borders. And this whole CrowdStrike thing, I think, is a precursor, just like 9/11 was to the Patriot Act. Every single time is just getting a little bit more and more to the point where, if you look at Peter Thiel and you look at Facebook and you look at JD Vance and all of this stuff, and by the way, they're just, Trump's in their pocket. And so I think there's so much bigger stuff going on. And the more that we can, focus on our country, which tariffs are a long haul to that, of getting manufacturing back and not being, relying on China. This is like the bottom line with this. We can't rely on China for things that really matter to us. And is it going to be painful for the next, 5 years, 10 years as costs continue to explode? Yeah. But then, the other side of that conversation is like, eventually more jobs come back to the US and, just in time deliveries and even assembling, not maybe full manufacturing, but assembling in the United States. This is what made the US great. The first industrial revolution. And we're going to get back to that. But it's being completely at even with the chips and everything that happens in Taiwan and all of that. And this is not conspiracy theory. This is black and white what's happening.
You're spot on. You're spot on.
And it's going to be painful. That's the only thing that I said I was going to make this quick. If I had to make it quick, it's going to be painful to make change, but some of this stuff is necessary. And I do think, as much as I don't want to be monitored, there's some stuff coming where we're going to get more and more monitored, and it's going to be in the name of protecting us on the United States ground. And there's a part of me that's like, yeah, monitor it, because it's going to get crazy.
Interesting. I like where you went. Mooch, what are you thinking?
Mike, when are you coming back to Austin? Because I feel so much safer with my prep escape plan when you're in Austin, right? Because I don't have one, but I know you do, right? I know if the stuff wouldn't have turned back on last week, I had to find one person, and it's you. So you need to stop traveling and you get back to Austin. Then I don't have to think about this stuff at all anymore, because you think about it, the way that you took tariffs and turned it into CrowdStrike which is on our docket, but like that was fantastic. Okay, so here's my big takes on it. Tariffs, like now mind you, I loved economics class and finance class and I was always so fascinated about it, into it. And tariffs do a couple things. Like one, yes, there is a chance that it increases inflation and costs depending on the product. So microchips, let's try to live without it, right? Cool. No one's going to live without phones. We've tested that out. Like unfortunately, sofas, maybe the demand goes down a little bit. So when we were selling houses in 2003 in Southern California, our margin was 50% back in 2003 on these houses. We were building and selling $700,000 houses, and we were 350,000 in on the Central Coast. It was crazy. And I remember thinking, like, wait, we're not selling houses based on our costs. We're selling them based on demand. It was this crazy moment. And then by 2005, our margins were down to 20,000 and 20% and 30%, then 20%. And why? Because there's this extra part. So it's not just supply demand, right? There's this, let me see if I can just share my screen and get to here, dude, let's see if this works. All right. You guys see that? My supply demand curve here. It's a different sort of supply demand because it's telling you like how much. So if you look at just that demand line, it tells you if something costs $50, 1,000 people want it, right? Or if something costs $10, when you go down to that lower corner on the left is 10, it shows you 5,000 people want it. So there's also this thing that happens in tariffs that doesn't necessarily affect anything. It doesn't necessarily have to affect your margin, but what it will affect is your volume. So when you go sell your sofas, Ash, and you go from a $30 price to a $40 price and you slide up that curve, it's not that you're not going to be able to sell them for 40. You're just going to be selling less, right? And so it's this whole analysis you'll be going to instead. How do I get back to you guys over here from my tablet? So tariffs impact that more than anything else. It really should. It's going to take like, what's the true demand when it comes to microchips? Like maybe if phones were $10,000, we wouldn't all need them. So there is some sort of a price on some of those products that we say, no, if phones are 10 grand, we will wait every 5 years.
Well, I think the reason I showed the chart is only one side of the story, and Mike was scratching on the other side. So it's worth having the conversation. I think what we learned during COVID is tariff created inflation. It wasn't necessarily as sensitive in terms of supply and demand, units, and all that kind of stuff. It's the American consumer is willing to pay for what they want. And if they have the discretionary income to buy stuff, they will, regardless of price. I think that's what it's shown. The other side of the conversation, which is really the intention of the tariff, which is what Mike talked about, is how do we become more of an industrious country where we make stuff here, right? We don't necessarily send our dollars on the other side of the world. And I think that's a fair and potentially a good argument, a good thing. The question is that realistic or is that feasible? And Mike, is there a tariff rate or a duty rate that really does push that lever to make it happen here? And or when does globalization no longer benefit us? Let me say that in a different way. I think you're right. There are some categories of product like security things, like the silicon chips you talked about. But are we really going to spin up North Carolina or Grand Rapids, Michigan, and become industrious manufacturing countries again? Are we going to, how many cars no longer are made in the United States? Are we going to bring back car manufacturing? And is that the sort of population that we want to have, or to spend that energy in America doing? And I guess that's the 50, 100-year question.
Well, okay, so you guys are both making really, really good points that I think are valid and true. I want to so I brought this up, 6 episodes ago or whatever, talking about Maslow's hierarchy of needs and like housing, just like backing real estate, right? But a lot of these things that we're concerned with are discretionary spending, whether it's phones, whether it's, I mean, what do we get from China that we can't live without other than antibiotics, medicines? You know, there is a bunch of things, so I shouldn't over categorize that.
Right. When
But
it comes to food, they buy all our food.
right. And
Right?
here's the
They like
crazy
buy our
thing
food. So
that this is the crazy thing that might blow our minds. Like, and Ash, you were just touching on vehicles. Did you know that vehicles are the number 4 export that we export out of the United States?
I did not know that.
Like, some of this is crazy. Do you know what our number 1 export in the United States of America is? This is going to blow your mind.
Soybeans.
No.
oil.
Oil. Like,
That's crazy.
We're so hung up all the time on freaking OPEC and the price of fuel and shut it down. And we're the second. It's insanity.
Who buys it from us? Who do we sell it to? Like
nuclear reactors is like our number 2 export. Electrical equipment and machinery. And so even like when it comes to
wow,
when it comes to like thinking about how we can't be a manufacturing powerhouse, if we stop creating nuclear reactors for the whole world that are going to bomb us, then maybe we can just refit the manufacturing plants with things that actually matter. And Ash, you brought up, the food exports, like wheat. We're like one of the top wheat. Us and Ukraine are like the top wheat exporters in the world. And so if we just like came back down to it, and let's just say that shipping did implode and we got into like, somebody drew a hard line on tariffs and we stopped all the fear mongering, I have a pretty good indication that as long as we had medicines and chips back home and the things that actually really matter, we would probably refit manufacturing pretty quickly, and we would stop shipping our oil all over the world and depending on, the Saudi Arabia and all these places to get us oil. I wonder sometimes if we're smarter here in the United States and some of our government and long-term planning is actually a lot more strategic and smart, even back to the uniparty, if they're not a lot more aligned. And, so many people have said that China thinks in hundreds of years. Maybe we are too, and we're just not seeing it on the surface.
I want to hear Maddie's take on tariffs because I think I'm always the guy. So I just love supply demand economics and I love free market stuff. And so for me, I'm like, it's fine, but it doesn't hit me or hurt me the way that I talk about interest rates. But I'd be curious on Matt's take on it too.
Fascinating.
I think it is fine. Just as a side note, Aaron, I think it is fine.
I mean, I think on the surface, right, Trump is trying to pull on the tariff string as a way to combat some of the egregious debt that we've got and getting dollars coming back in. But to your point, Ash, right? I mean, that is something that, some of the cons that you think about is higher costs for consumers. That's number one. And that matters to people, especially in the times that we're in right now. You also look at the potential challenges that come with trade wars. And that's a whole different game of chess that when you start jacking up prices and taxes on things with, strategic partners that you're so intricately woven into each other's economies, the way we are with China, and you think about it in other, parts of the world, but mainly China, right? I mean, that is like a ball of yarn that nobody can understand, that when you start pulling on that thing, what knots, what rips, what tears are going to be, found in that system that could ultimately backfire in a really big way. So I do love Mike's point, though, which is one of the things that made America so amazing was our, industrial revolution in manufacturing. And one of the things that, continues to make our country such a world superpower in the, in the kind of category of capitalism is the fact that most of, our big companies that still do manufacturing on a global stage, a lot of it is just in categories that we know we can drive, like the industrial war complex, right? You look at car manufacturing. So when I think of, some of the opportunities that America has by bringing manufacturing back into the United States, it would be, some short-term pain in the long, timeline that we're thinking on. but I think it would be a net positive and benefit to the country as a whole to control a lot of these things that we've kind of over time eroded and relinquished to other, countries. And that now is starting to create a lot of challenges for us on a global stage. And obviously it's showing up in, people's pocketbooks in their day-to-day lives. So I don't know. I'm a little, I would say, still uneducated on, really thinking through that tariff, timeline and the overall impact that it would have. But I would love to see us, and I think Trump is a smart businessman and he thinks these things through. So when he does something or says something, there's usually 3, 4, or 5 moves thought out ahead of it. And going back to the "we don't understand" comment that Mike made earlier, I think these are complicated, complex topics that, the average American doesn't understand, nor do they really think they want to understand, because it's not something that they feel like they have any control over. But if there was more buy-in and there was more, I guess, alignment with these decisions and how it shows up for the American people, I think you would get more people engaged in these important conversations. And I think that's part of, the game politics plays really well, is we understand these things, you don't. You go out and do these things and we'll handle all this over here. And by relinquishing a lot of that control, we've gotten ourselves into some pretty precarious positions over the last few decades.
Yeah.
So
here's
much more
to talk about there.
A couple of quick things that might happen. I just want to put a bow on it, at least from my perspective, from like the real version for somebody out there listening, of like, how does this really affect us, or like what is a possible outcome they're trying to do. Ash manufactures stuff in China, right? And if the tariff rate in Mexico is cheaper than China, then it's going to have people like Ash consider like, oh, should we build this product in Mexico instead? Because we can keep that same price, that same market. Should we move should we hire less people in China and more people in Mexico and import that way in order to make our business work? Like, we outsource through India, Philippines, we outsource a bunch of different ways, right? Through software. And if that's an outcome, that's an intended outcome, right? That's an intended outcome of like the threats of like, China, you aren't acting the way that we want. So if we do this, our smart entrepreneurs that are manufacturing in China, they will find other ways to not manufacture in China because of that. And so that's like a real possible outcome at small levels, of course, or maybe big levels.
That's yeah. You said it correctly. Yep.
Yeah. But anyway.
Yep.
Thanks for letting us
look at what Elon. People follow Elon. I mean, look what Elon is doing. He's thinking about the same thing. Should I spin up a factory in this country versus another? Should I move from this state to another? These things, these policy changes do have impact at a certain scale, right? Like, I don't think 5 or 7 years ago I would have thought about this in the way I do now, right? So,
well, the world has just gotten so much smaller with technology too, right? So the game that we were playing that was somewhat in buckets or boxes has now somewhat become one contiguous, board game that we're now playing with pieces that are intertwined together in ways they never were before. So it is very interesting to think about it in the sense of, if you were looking at one chessboard and all of a sudden that chessboard became 10 times larger and you've got 10 times more pieces on that chessboard, the strategy of how you play that game and the implications of every single move is very much different than the one that was 10 times smaller. So I think that is the process we're literally going through right now.
Well, I think we have to consider global employment, like age of workers in these manufacturing settings. We have to consider technology and innovation. And we've talked about it on the pod, like we have to talk about freight. I don't have enough historical information on this topic, but freight has been stable and low for the last at least 10 to 20 years. I'm going to really look for a chart on this, but if freight is low, then it makes the world, it's a marketplace. And you can go and buy things around the world at the best price, at a good quality. But if freight is significantly fluctuating like oil does now, it will change the dynamic. So, Mike, I think all of this is good. I think there's a lot of different angles to this, but I think we're going to see the effects of this years to come, 10, 20, 30 years from now, because I think that the world of globalization is shifting by some of these dynamics. I want to talk about the tech.
There's really
Go
quick.
ahead.
There's a really good book called The Rise of America by Marin Katusa. You might want to get your hands on that because it talks about a really bright future for America.
Well, I'm going to China on Friday. Checking in on what's going on. So I'll give an update on my side too about what I learned and ask some of these questions. What's going on behind the curtain of China here too. But I want to talk about the global tech outage that we just had last week. Can we pivot to that?
Oh, those boys are so ready.
All right. So guys, last week, if you're listening to this, a week ago, we had the world's largest IT outage in history. I want to go through sort of the details of what happened here. There's a company called Crowdstrike, which is one of the fastest growing tech security companies, software security companies in the United States. And they sent out basically a really simple script update on their software, mostly to Microsoft computers, and created this huge outage of blue screens all around the world to some of the biggest companies in the world. Just to be really specific, the outage affected an estimated of 8.5 million Windows devices, only 1% of all Windows machines. Okay. This ended up affecting, let's just talk about airlines for a minute, because I know I had an effect. Mike, we were stuck for a little bit. More than 2,500 flights into or out of the United States have been canceled as of last Friday. This article is a few days old, and more than 6,000 flights delayed in the United States. 3,000 flights were canceled, and more than 11,000 were delayed, according to FlightAware, by Friday. That contradicts itself, but let's keep going here. Southwest, ironically, wasn't affected. I don't know if you guys heard that.
Mm-hmm.
That's funny.
Delta still 1 week later is still catching up, and this has affected obviously the airlines. It's affected medical systems, government offices, multinational corporations. It is just such a big nuclear bomb, and it's only 1% of Microsoft computers. And I said in the chat, what would 5% look like?
Yeah.
But what an amazing example of how interconnected the world is and how sort of dependent of this stuff. This was like harmless. And before we start getting into conspiracy theory, okay, guys, like this was just a simple software update.
That doesn't add up.
As soon as they, well, you can start adding, but as soon as they figured it out, they tried to back into it. And at that point, so go ahead, steel man it. Let's look at it from all the different ads. Maddie, go ahead. Tell us why we should. What should we be really looking at, Maddie? Here.
What should we really be looking at? I'm not telling anybody where they should be looking. I'm just telling you guys where I am.
Except right here.
I'm telling you guys where I explore, and I did see that. I think Delta noted that they're already to date going to lose about $500 million as a result of this. I mean, that's wild, right? So when you think about the implications, and Ty Lopez did a little, I want to see if I can pull it up, because he shared something that I thought was interesting, in the sense that while we are investing so much time, energy, and resources into our military and being the military police of the world, we have neglected to make those same investments and understanding that we are the cyber police and leader of the world as well. And when something like this happens, and you're spot on, Ash, 1%, and to see the ripple effect it had and how insane the repercussions of this outage were, to think about what it would look like at 5%, or 25%, or 50%. I mean, we're talking about essentially the implosion of the world as we know it. Flat out. I mean, you can make it sound like, oh, that's aggressive and that's way, far out there. No, if that happened at that level, the amount of mass chaos that would ensue, the lack of resources and access to things that individuals need on a daily basis, would turn the world into a complete burning inferno of chaos. And he I'm going to see if I can, or you're screen sharing right now. Let me screen share this really fast with you. And just to show kind of what Ty Lopez was saying here. And let me just pulling this up.
What is going on? Today there was a bug with Microsoft and the whole United States almost shut down. Airlines, banks, the whole world crashes. When will politicians have a brain and stop, like in America, spending $1 trillion on military, instead spend $100 billion on fixing the infrastructure? So one IT bug, one software glitch doesn't take down all the banks, all the airlines, everything, electricity next. When will politicians have a brain? I'm talking about both sides, Republicans and Democrats. When will people start thinking? This is a serious deal. Oh, God help you when this world, when electricity goes down and people can't get eggs, milk, and water. It doesn't matter. You don't need to spend so much on the army and the military. Protect your homeland, protect your grid. That is military defense.
Basically, though, what he was just saying, right, is just how important it is to, be investing as many dollars as we are in building up our military as it is in building up the infrastructure in our IT and cybersecurity. And I had, and I'll just stop screen sharing here for a second. I saw a post the other day that I just thought was interesting. I'm just going to start by saying anything that could be out there is just interesting. Okay. We'll just preface it with that. The president of Crowdstrike Services and the chief security officer served as the executive assistant director of the FBI under the Obama-Biden administration. And I just thought, that was kind of interesting. And so I guess this guy's name is Sean Henry, and he was the chief security officer and president of Crowdstrike Services. He joined Crowdstrike in 2012 after retiring from the FBI Senior Executive Service. Prior to joining the private sector, Henry spent 24 years with the FBI, where he held various operational leadership roles, eventually becoming executive assistant director, overseeing half of the FBI's investigative operations, including all FBI criminal and cyber investigations worldwide, international operations, and the FBI's critical incident response to major investigations and disasters. He also managed computer crime investigations spanning the globe and established the National Cyber Investigative Joint Task Force. And so I just thought it was, interesting.
This is the CEO? This is the CEO?
Correct. Yep. And so a lot of people are kind of going down the rabbit hole on this dude. And, I think he made a comment saying it was, hey, this was our biggest blunder ever of my career and da-da-da. So he kind of came out publicly and took some ownership of it. But it's just weird how the global outage happened during, President Trump's national, speech at the RNC convention after the assassination attempt. I had a buddy that is ex-special forces in the military. He's got a very high clearance in cybersecurity, still works within the government right now. And he was saying kind of in some of their side chats and channels that there's a lot of stuff that's not adding up. Is it Dominion? Dominion operates a lot of their voting and polling systems, essentially all of them, through CrowdStrike and their servers.
Of course they do.
That was a random discussion that has kind of come up from them.
I hate this whole conversation. Like this is just...
I hate the ability to connect dots, man. Jesus.
And there could be nothing there, right? But what I'm saying is some of the people I've talked to that they're not deep conspiracy theorists, but these are just experts and technicians in their field, right? Just like what's his name was Mr. Matt, from our conversation last week. We regard him as an expert, and I'm sure he kind of held some of his thoughts and opinions to just be fair and reasonable and not come off as a conspiracy theorist. But off the record, talking with a handful of people in their field, they're like, there's just a lot of these things don't make any sense. And for it to be at the extent and globally the way it was, normally you have your infrastructure in a lot of those ways. They're bucketed, right? So that way, hey, if something happens in the US, it's not happening in Europe, and it's not happening nation globally over here and there. So there's just some basic checks and balances in a lot of these stories that the average person wouldn't understand. that for technical expert, based individuals that understand how these things work are saying there's a lot of fishy stuff going on with that.
All right, I know Mikey agrees. Mikey, what's your perspective before I kill myself over here?
Do you guys remember CrowdStrike from like the late teens?
No.
Like CrowdStrike.
No, I don't remember this. Never heard of this company.
Okay, this is crazy. There's a video, and I don't have it handy, but there's a video. I didn't know we were going to go down the rabbit hole. So yeah, there's a video of Donald Trump on, I think, NBC News in 2019.
Oh yeah, you had shared.
Oh, I did see that. Yes.
Yeah, talking about this Ukrainian company that had the Democratic.
The video. I'll find it for you.
Okay. Had the Democratic server, and the owner of this is from Ukraine, and some of this stuff could just absolutely be coincidence. I have kind of like a different, and this is not good for Donald Trump in my brain, or this is not good for Democrats or Republicans. Like I said this at the beginning of the episode, but as much as, even if a person like Donald Trump doesn't know the entire inner workings, if you're going to get elected as the president of the United States, you are bought. And there's all this lobbying that happens that comes at you. And I kind of alluded to this earlier, but if you look at JD Vance, which again, I'm all for electing Donald Trump. So I'm not at the end of the day saying that we shouldn't, but I am saying that, I think this is all so intertwined. And even if there's not evil happening behind the scenes, it's money at the end of the day. And if you look at, if you follow the money, and you look at JD Vance, Peter Thiel is like one of JD Vance's, it's his protege. JD Vance is his protege. He invested in JD Vance's main company. By the way, I've brought up Joe Lonsdale multiple times on this, podcast. He's the guy that, Aaron and Maddie, we listened to in 2020 that has started more billion dollar companies. I'm a fan of Joe Lonsdale, but Palantir that he started, his main investor was Peter Thiel. And Palantir is currently working on some, back-end software that helps monitor and track, United States citizens as well as potential terrorists and all of this stuff. And then, you can see from June 27th, Peter Thiel saying, if you put a gun to my head, I would vote for Donald Trump. And then you see just a few weeks later, JD Vance come in and get elected or selected as the vice president. And then all of a sudden, Peter Thiel and all the tech founders are backing Donald Trump now with a firestorm. And, whether this is conspiracy theory or not, and whether there's malice at play or not, the future of the military industrial complex is not just overseas. It's right here in America. And Peter Thiel is one of the early investors in Facebook. And then all of a sudden you see Mark Zuckerberg come out and say, Donald Trump is a badass. I'm not voting for him, but he's a badass. The entire narrative changed when all of a sudden it's let's put JD Vance in there, who's a big tech founder, who's going to support and put all this money into United States tech companies. And again, whether that's bad or good, I'm not advocating for, but just follow the money.
Oh man.
Can you guys see this?
A lot of it had to do, they say, with Ukraine.
But Mr. President,
it's very interesting. It's very interesting. They have the server, right, from the DNC, Democratic National Committee.
Who has the server?
Now, the FBI went in and they told him, get out of here. We're not giving it to you. They gave the server to Crowdstrike or whatever it's called, which is a company owned by a very wealthy Ukrainian. And I still want to see that server. The FBI has never gotten that server. That's a big part of this whole thing. Why did they give it to a Ukrainian company?
Are you sure they did that? Are you sure they gave it to Ukraine?
Well, that's what the word is, and that's what I asked actually in my phone call, if you know.
Right.
I mean, I asked it very point blank because we're looking for corruption. There's tremendous corruption. We're looking for, why should we be giving hundreds of millions of dollars to countries when there's this kind of corruption?
All right, so mind being blown here as we get to go through some.
I'm going to shoot myself here.
So you know why I hate it, Ash? Because have you guys seen the show Scandal? Remember that TV show?
Oh,
yes.
so good.
That's
what
right
I feel
now,
like we're living in now.
So
this pod
Scandal
is becoming a scandal.
Scandal came out in 2008, 2009. All right, I'm older than most of our listeners, right? But it's all coming true over the past 3 or 4 years, and it is the most freaked out. Like maybe our tin hats is just the fact that we used to watch that TV show. But the reason I don't like it is because I just don't like the idea or the thought of it or the what if it is true. Because I don't go down the same things as often, but mostly that's like a conscious effort to not get caught up, because I can get caught up in the way my brain works because of the TV shows and stuff that I love. But as I hear some of that and I start to hear about voting machines, it's like, of course it is. Right. When I even shared with you guys in the chat, the theory out there of like, oh, they need to be able to delete all the proof they have about trying to kill the president since he didn't get killed. It's like, oh, of course there is. How about like the companies that like shorted Donald Trump's stock ahead of time before, and you're like, oh my God. And then you have the same thing of the companies that shorted the airline stocks before September 11th. Like, I hate, oh yes, right. I hate all of this stuff because I do believe that a lot of that is true. I know if we ever do did 9/11 happen, whatever, if we go down some of those YouTube things that I've watched, it scares me. I like the biggest thing that came out of how can so much stuff get struck down from a virus, a 1% of computers, how some survived and how some didn't. It's just not fun. Like, it's not fun, and it's a depressing thing, and I'd rather not think about it.
It's not fun. It's like, is this just what it is now? I mean, every mistake, every issue, every problem, every natural disaster has stories. People start looking into how all these things connect. I mean, how is that helpful, I guess?
Well,
especially if
well,
we're
now
never
I'm going to question the election. Now I'm wondering, okay,
that's
voting,
my point. That's my point.
Voting
We're just
machines,
setting ourselves up.
I totally believe it and be like, oh, all right, I'm fucked.
And it goes back to your shit about creating confusion, man. Like,
well,
now we're just being trained to question everything.
Okay, but that's how it's helpful, because what I've kind of been, as Maddie would say, you start pulling on that thread. At some point in time, and I mean, even just look 4 years ago during COVID, the things that people were saying, and most people are like, you're off your rocker. And then you fast forward 4 years later, and I hear you guys loud and clear. The problem with this is like, what's truth, what's not truth? We may never know, confusion. But the other side of the argument is like, put our head in the sand and just bend over and take it like we all did in COVID, and think that like the early people that were like, this is insanity. I was following Chris Martenson he started talking about COVID in November, December. And I was following Chris Martenson early and actually sharing with Kara, and she's like, you're off your rocker, quit listening to him. And then all of a sudden COVID happens. And then, people, we just naturally want to put our head in the sand. And how does it matter, and how is it important? I want to just make sure I address this. It's unfortunately, like Donald Trump has said about drain the swamp. And then, my 2 cents is that Donald Trump's going to get elected, and in 4 years from now, like, he's going to be bigger part of the swamp. I think we're truly dealing with the swamp's still going to be there. We're truly dealing with the uniparty issue. And until like Americans stop putting our head in the sand and start controlling, what we can, and demand accountability. What I liked about the congressional hearings is seeing like, people that are usually partisan and super divided, like agreeing on one thing. And again, I know we can go like off the edge and out into conspiracy theory, but I think at the end of the day, it's like, just trying to get to the truth and having conversations and what can we do about it. And I think long term, it's going to be painful, but all of this, we've gotten to a point where like literally the world is controlled by money. I mean, Kiyosaki said this forever. He who has the gold rules. And that's what's happening right now. And again, as much as Trump says, I want to drain the swamp, he's taking the money just like everybody else.
I believe him.
I just wonder how much of all of that is just for theater. And I think, when do things just become more normal where you don't, I mean, you're right, it was bipartisan, but it was also theater, right?
Well, it's accountability.
Your point is like, like people that also hate Trump were like getting on the same way, and you're saying, are they valid? Are they being authentic, or are they doing that for because they're on TV? It's impossible to know with all of it. So much of everything we do is theater. It's man, we hit so many topics today, and the fact that Mike's been sitting in an airport for 2 hours, a part of this today as well. You got to get back to our bunker fast, Mike, and just make sure that thing's ready for me when I get back in town. Like, because it sounds like it might be getting closer.
You want to know what it reminds me of? This discussion is there's so many things that we love to give energy, and I have to say this to myself all the time, is we give so much energy to things that are totally out of our control. And when you really want to become unstoppable, like you become unstoppable when you work on the things that people can't take away from you, right? Like the things like your mindset, your family, your character, your personality, transparency, like just your entire being as a whole. Like when it's so cliche, and you hear people always talk about your life, your business grows to the extent that you do. But man, going back to that confusion comment, Mike, that just really resonated with me today. Sometimes it's so easy and you don't even know until someone brings it to your attention that you've been running around in circles with your head cut off trying to answer all of these random questions that you have in your head that don't really freaking matter to improving your day-to-day life, your day-to-day business, your day-to-day bank account, your family, your health. So that is my reminder for today, is to reavert and focus my energy and attention to the things that nobody can take away from me.
Yeah, Maddie, stop taking us into wormholes, bro. God damn it.
Things that
get
nobody,
back in your ice bath.
Things that nobody can take away from you, like guns, food, gas, like
Twitter. Can't take Twitter away. So such a fascinating time. I feel like just going back to the whole tech thing, it's really interesting how 40 years ago we were really submissive as a population, like whatever the government told us to do, we were doing. And now, Mikey, you're saying we basically have overcorrected and now we don't trust anything that anyone says. But it's really fascinating that some of the most powerful, successful, powerful, influential people in the world, these tech CEOs, like started first promoting, all of the COVID stuff, the lockdowns, the work from home. They were like the ones that initiated it, the woke agendas, all the DEI stuff. And now it's like, oh, well, we're just going to shelve that, like as if that never happened. And now we're going to follow Trump. And we gaslit Trump for 5 or 6 years or maybe 8 years. And now all of a sudden we're going to write hundreds of millions of dollar checks. I mean, I think I think they think that our memory is really short, and I think we have to just be really thoughtful as the general population. But what a fun day. What a good conversation.
Guys, we promise we'll get less off the conspiracy theories in future discussions. I don't know, though. We're leading up to the campaign.
It's a weird time,
to
man.
November.
It's like
it was the
time. Craziest week. I mean, I love that Elon Musk exists because I think there's at least one person who is not being bought by other people and that tends to, use his brains and influence for what he thinks is right. I mean, so I'm glad we got guys like him because I think that that's like the valid stuff that happens. And I still, as we get to go through kind of most of this, I do love that closing thought and the idea, which is how I live my life. Although there's times when I question it. Some of the time I've told you guys before, like, why don't I have a bunker? Why haven't I prepped? Why don't I have a getaway plane and the 100 acres? Because part of me is like, no, I believe that there will be more clues as we get closer. So in the meantime, I should try to be as successful or as big as I can to build other stuff. But it was a crazy week. And I think the average American, like, I'm flustered with it. I'm stressed with it. It's stuff I try not to pay attention to, and my brain can't not. And I just imagine the average American much to the same week where they're like, wait, what? Wait, a president almost getting assassinated? Wait, stuff getting down, like flights getting canceled and not knowing what to believe that's out there. The highlight of my month, though, highlight of my July is, Zuck. Zuck a few years ago was a nerdy, crusty CEO. And on the 4th of July, we got Zuck surfing in a boat in Tahoe. I didn't get to see him out there. I just saw his Instagram. Holding an American flag while drinking a beer, looking cool. Like 2 years ago in Tahoe, he's like, there's the picture of him covered in like white paste and looking like a nerd. And so 4th of July, Zuck is holding the American flag, drinking a beer. And then, on that interview, he says, Trump looked like a badass. It was like one of the most badass things I've ever seen.
PR team.
And I was like, yes. So his PR. So I'm a fan. I'm a fan of Musk.
He's a fan.
And I'm a fan of Zuckerberg this month. Although I do know that the wool's being pulled over my eyes to make me a fan of Zuck. I know he's being created, but I like this new thing that's being created over there.
Well, on that note, Facebook, Palantir, like these tech titans are the new.
They're all connected, dude.
No, so Halliburton, Raytheon, these were like the old companies that were the military industrial complex. Dick Cheney was associated. The tech titans are there. That's the new military industrial complex. Watch the next 20 years.
I'm gonna go download
David
Scandal.
Sachs is speaking at the RNC, baby. I mean, David Sachs is speaking at the RNC. Those $500,000 tickets, Elon Musk is involved. These are small rooms of 100 people. I don't think that's conspiracy. I think that's just physical, like logistically what happens. You call your 25 most influential friends and you make shit happen in the world. That's just what happens.
Jeez, man, you guys are
Scandal was
like
a TV story from Scandal was from 2012 to 2018. You can go download the 80 episodes and get caught up on our future. So I'm gonna go download all the episodes of Scandal and watch them on Fly in the next few days. Get caught up.
Gosh, you guys are losing it, man.
Look, we're not doing this for the listeners. We're doing this for us, so that in 20 years we can watch these recordings and say, what did we get right? What were we wrong? Good episode today.
We should label this a special episode, like a special edition, just so we don't get black boxed.
We were
special
should we? Last week we promised everyone, should we play like the 1 minute prediction from that guy? I think we should hit that YouTube clip. What do you guys think?
Yeah.
Do we? I think we need to close it out with that, because at the end of the last one, like it's like a 1 minute or 2 minute clip that I think everyone should hear.
Oh, there we go.
All right, here it goes.
Look at Timmy.
Tim's got it up. Look at Tim. Boom.
This guy got a little wacky for me.
Fire away. So start right at like 11 minutes. I think it works. So this is like from 4 months from 8. This is from April. Like they bring on like 4 people as giving predictions. So like go ahead and play it. Yeah.
It was being birthed and it just kept spreading like fire all throughout America, and I saw Trump rising up, and then I saw an attempt on his life. This bullet flew by his ear, and it came so close to his head that it busted his eardrum. And I saw he fell to his knees during this time frame, and he started worshiping the Lord. He got radically born.
All right, Tim, you can stop it there.
I'm talking
because he gets pretty wacky.
He gets psycho.
All right, so this
Come on.
I would elect this guy for my next president. No, I've studied this little video.
No, I'm gonna have that guy invest in stocks for me. Forget about it. Electing him to be president. He should run a fund.
So guys, listeners, like, I don't know about you. When I heard that, it freaking blew my mind. And we put the link to the show notes in the last one. But this guy says, I saw an attempt on his life, and a bullet flew so close to his ear, it shattered his eardrum. Man, like a bullet going through his ear feels a lot like that. And so like it was like creepy and weird. So my question to you guys, and I went through the rest of it, and now I've taken notes and I know what my life plan is. And I'm going to watch Scandal to get caught up on some of the specific strategy of when things are going to happen. But do enough people make random ass predictions that's just random? Like, are there a million predictions out there, a million videos of prophets out there, because the world we live in, that like we're going to find something? Or is it like a Simpsons moment? Like, did the Simpsons just do enough episodes, or did the Simpsons get shit right?
So this was I showed that to Marie. I was on one of my little research things that I showed that to Marie, and she's like, well, yeah, no shit. Like, if somebody said there's going to be an assassination on Trump's attempt on Trump's life, would that be like really far out there? And I'm like, well, no. And she's like, okay. And when an assassin, goes to kill somebody, are they shooting for their belly, or are they shooting at their head? And is there a probability that they're going to potentially miss that person's head and, shoot close
How
to
do
their
you
ear.
how do you stay married to this lady? We need to have Marie. We need to get her on the podcast. So next, we're going to get her on the podcast to come on whenever
his,
they're going down.
his tendencies.
She's going to make me feel better about all of this.
Tendencies come from.
I was like, well, me and Aaron think that this is totally far out. And she's like, God, you guys are idiots.
Oh my, maybe she's going to make us feel better about ourselves. All right. What about Mikey and what did you guys think?
Pretty specific.
It's pretty specific.
I was pretty specific.
I think it was recorded last week and it was post dated.
No way.
Can't post date on YouTube.
No way.
No, man. You could send somebody, but all right, guys. Well, there you go. A special episode of the King's Table. Man alive, we are crossing some lines here. I love it. Thanks so much for listening, everybody. We hit some really good topics. I think we're gonna have to. I'm gonna have to listen to some of that again and be like, man, we got into some real wormholes there. But on behalf of myself, Ashish Nathu, and my good friends Aaron and Muchastegui, the trend spotter himself, logging in from some hotel room in the middle of nowhere, Mike Ayala, the sage, finding a little airport cube that he's conveniently locked up in for the last 2 hours. Thanks for logging in, Mikey, and of course, Maddie Aitchison, the king of conspiracy.
The king of conspiracy. I don't know who changed his name tag, but I see it right there. The Caesar of conspiracy.
The Caesar of conspiracy.
You guys need to
love you guys.
Man. You guys are.
I love you guys. Thanks so much for listening to the King's Table podcast. See you guys.
Listeners, thank you for listening.
Peace.